guys. Welcome back to CRYPTID'S Den. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the heartbreak happening in Texas right now. Families struck by last week's devastating flash floods in the hill country are facing unimaginable loss, with over 119 lives confirmed lost and more than 160 still missing, and precious young campers among them. My heart goes out to everyone affected. This community stands with those grieving families. We share your sorrow, honor your loved ones, and send our deepest condolences. If you're tuning in from Texas or somewhere close to these events, please know we're here for you. You're not alone. Let me know where you're watching from, and feel free to reach out in the comments. If you haven't yet, please hit subscribe so this space can continue to be one of solace and support. Now let's get into it. Have you ever seen something that didn't belong to this world, but somehow you knew you had to follow it? That night, we didn't just encounter a strange creature on a dark curve in the road. We stepped into something deeper, into the forest, into our fears, into a part of ourselves we thought would left behind. The truth is, there are beings among us who don't need to be believed to deserve our help. And sometimes, the one crying out isn't the one who's hurt, but the one begging for someone they love. My name is Claire. I'm a painter now, living quietly in Oregon. But before I ever picked up a brush, I stood in a forest, blood on my hands, heart pounding, face to face with something no one would believe. That night changed everything. If you've ever thought of the woods as something to fear, this story might make you want to go back. You'll see how a single silent choice, made in a breathless moment, can reshape the way you see the world, even if the world never sees you back. I was once a little girl left behind in the woods, but that night, a wordless creature gave me a second chance to rescue the part of myself I thought was lost forever. I've never told this story until now. So, if you've ever felt forgotten, don't scroll past this. Some stories don't need to be believed, they just need to be heard. We weren't supposed to be on that road, but Sprig was. I remember the night like it's burned into my skin. The sky was one solid sheet of black, no stars, no moon, just the kind of darkness that eats up your headlights and throws your reflection back in the glass. We were somewhere in the northern edge of California. I couldn't even tell you the name of the road. It wasn't on any map we had. Just one of those narrow back roads that slither between pine trunks like it's hiding something. We were running on fumes, in more ways than one. Eli was driving, white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. His jaw clenched so tight I could hear his teeth grind every time we hit a bump. The radio had fizzled out 10 minutes ago, leaving nothing but static, then silence. It was just us, and the hum of old tires on wet gravel. My feet were freezing. My stomach was empty. And Ellie, he'd just told me he'd maxed out the last of our cards on gas and jerky 2 towns ago. We were supposed to be somewhere else by now. The plan was California. Coastal farm. A work trade deal to get us through 2 weeks before we headed home. But the thing about road trips at 24, with a truck that eats oil like candy and 2 people who haven't really looked each other in the eyes in days, plans get blurry. I stared out the window, but the forest gave nothing back, just silhouettes and shadows that shifted if you stared too long. You could've told me earlier, I said, voice low, trying not to shake. I didn't want to fight, Eli muttered. You've been on edge all day. No, Eli, I've been honest all day. There's a difference. He sighed through his nose. That passive-aggressive hiss that meant he was trying not to explode. We'd been here before. The loop. Silent treatments, muttered sarcasm, guilt that hung around like fog. My hand went to the glove box, fumbling for my granola bar stash. Empty. Of course it was. That's when it happened. Eli slammed the brakes so hard I smacked into the dashboard. My chest buckled against the belt. My heart rocketed into my throat. What the hell, Eli? She whispered. The headlights cut across the road like a searchlight. And standing dead center was something. I blinked, thinking it was a deer. Maybe a raccoon, but no. This thing. It stood upright, covered in thick, brown-gray hair, soaked and matted from rain. Barely 3 feet tall. Arms down, not raised, not scared, not running, just staring. At us, I couldn't breathe. Eerly's hand was hovering over the gear shift. "What is that?" I leaned forward, squinting, my breath fogging the windshield. "I don't know." The creature took one slow step forward. It didn't flinch under the lights. Its eyes, God, its eyes were huge, not round like an animal's, deep set, dark, wet. There was something ancient in them. Something familiar. My heart didn't race. It slowed. And then I felt it. Not fear. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. I know this sounds crazy, but in that moment, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. I used to have this dream when I was little. I was lost in a forest, barefoot, crying, my knees all scratched up, and something would crouch beside me. Something big, covered in fur. But I was never afraid. Because of the eyes. Those eyes told me I was safe. That I wasn't alone. I never saw the full face. Just the shape. Just the gaze. It was this. I swear to God, it was this. "Claire," Eli said again. But his voice was quieter now. Less sure. I opened the door without thinking. The cold slapped me across the face, but I didn't care. I stepped out onto the gravel, the pine needles crunching under my boots. The smell of wet bark and metal and diesel filled my nose. Eli hissed from inside. "What the hell are you doing?" But I didn't answer. The creature didn't move, just tilted its head like it was curious. Like it was studying me, too. I crouched, slowly, hands out, palms open. "It's okay," I whispered. "I see you." I didn't even realize I was crying until the wind hit my cheeks and made the tears sting. The thing didn't flinch. And then, slowly, so slowly, it took one more step. Just enough to catch the edge of our headlights. Enough to let me see the mud caked around its fur. The scratches on its arms. The way its fingers curled around something. A broken twig? A bone? Or, no. It was holding something soft. Something torn. Fabric. It looked down at it. Then back at me. I heard Eli's door swing open behind me. "Claire, come on. Get in. I don't like this." "I think it needs help," I said, my voice barely a breath. "Help?" It's a sick bear or a freaking shaved chimp or I don't know. But we're not playing animal rescue in the middle of nowhere. I stood slowly, backing toward the truck, but I didn't take my eyes off it. It didn't follow. It didn't growl. It just stood there, watching, waiting. We weren't supposed to be on that road. We were supposed to take Highway 4, but we missed the turn, arguing. Took the long way around. Because we always did. It was like life knew we weren't ready to arrive anywhere just yet. But it was. It was supposed to be there. And I think, deep down, so were we. That night, the forest didn't feel empty. It felt like it had been waiting. Like he had been waiting. For us. For someone. For anything willing to stop. We climbed back in the truck, but I couldn't take my eyes off the rear view. The shape in the headlights never moved. Until we did. And just before it vanished into the dark, I swear, I saw it raise its hand. Just a little, like a question. Or maybe an invitation. Either way, it wasn't over. Not yet. He didn't run. That's what stuck with me. He didn't panic, didn't flinch, didn't bolt into the trees like any other wild animal would. He stayed. He looked right at us, like he knew. We were parked there for what felt like an hour, though it couldn't have been more than a minute. I could still hear the engine ticking, cooling down after Eli cut it. The heat vents wheezed and blew that faint smell of old coffee and rust, but all I could see was him. This little creature covered in patchy fur, his chest rising fast like he'd been running for miles. But he wasn't running anymore. He was watching. I opened the door again. Eli didn't stop me this time. He just grunted and looked away, like the whole thing had exhausted him before it had even begun. I stepped out, slow, arms down, not threatening. I don't know what I thought I was doing. But he didn't seem scared of me. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking. Then he did something I'll never forget. He walked toward the truck. Not like an animal, cautious, sniffing the air. No. He walked upright like he'd been doing it his whole life, wobbling a little. Sure, like a toddler in oversized shoes, but deliberate, curious. And then he reached up and placed his hand, if you could call it that, against the passenger side door. 4 long fingers, pads like a primate but longer, smudged with mud and something dark. Blood, maybe? There was a tremble in his fingertips, but he didn't pull away. I crouched again, close enough to hear his breathing. He was panting, like he was too young to control his fear, but too desperate to leave. Eli called from the cab, his voice cutting through the moment like a rock through glass. "This is insane! It's probably sick." I ignored him. I pulled a bandana from my back pocket, just something I'd used to wipe down the dash earlier. I offered it gently, instinctively. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was stupid. But something told me he'd understand. And he did. He reached out, snatched it quick like a raccoon might grab food, but he didn't eat it. He sniffed it, then clutched it tight against his chest. That's when he turned, not to flee, but to lead. He glanced back once, gave a short, sharp gesture with his arm, then started toward the trees. Slow. Looking back every few steps to make sure we were following. I didn't need more than that. I was already moving before I realized it. Eli slammed his hand against the wheel. No, absolutely not. We're not chasing some feral science project into the woods in the middle of nowhere. He wants us to follow? How the hell would you know that? I don't. I looked at him, really looked. And he looked tired. Not just road trip tired. Worn down, like this was the last straw. But I think someone needs help. Maybe his mom. Maybe he's lost. I don't know. But he came to us. Eli got out finally, slamming the door harder than he needed to. What? He's just gonna take us to his treehouse now? Claire, come on. You want to follow this thing into the woods with no flashlight, no weapons, no clue. He didn't ask you, Eli. He came to me. I hadn't meant it to cut the way it did. But it landed, and I saw it in his face. Still, he followed. At a distance. Like someone babysitting a person on the verge of a breakdown. Maybe I was. The trees swallowed us fast. It was that kind of forest, dense, damp, and ancient feeling. You take 10 steps and suddenly the truck, the road, the rest of the world, all gone. Just pine needles, wet bark, and the quiet crack of twigs under boots. Sprig. That's what I started calling him in my head. Move like he knew the path. Ducking under limbs. Avoiding roots. Every once in a while, he'd make a low hum, a sound that vibrated more than echoed. Like a call, a signal. We kept on, deeper. Like a call, steeper. My jacket snagged on a branch and ripped near the wrist. Eli was muttering under his breath the whole time. Something about how this was how horror movies started. But he didn't turn around. Then Sprigg stopped, dead still, his head tilted again. I saw it in his stance before I heard it. A sound answered, but not from where I expected. It came from behind us. Then again, off to the right. Same tone, same rhythm, but not the same direction. My stomach dropped. Something about it didn't feel right. Sprigg looked scared now, not terrified. Just focused. His little shoulders tensed. His arms spread a little, like he was bracing. Eli heard it too. What the hell was that? Sprig didn't move, just made the sound again. A longer note this time. Then silence. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. And suddenly I was 5 again, lost in the woods behind our house in Maine. My dad had left me there. Just for a few minutes, he said, to teach me a lesson for wandering off too far. But he didn't come back. Not for hours. I'd sat curled against a tree trunk, heart hammering, thinking I'd die there, that no one was coming. And now, standing there with damp leaves under my boots and that low call hanging in the air, it hit me all over again. The feeling of being small, forgotten, unwanted. My knees buckled. Eli grabbed my arm, caught me before I hit the ground. Whoa, hey, are you... I know why I can't leave him, I said. My voice cracked like a branch snapping underfoot. I know why I can't. What are you talking about? Because I was him. Sprig turned to us, his face. It was hard to read, half in shadow, half in moonlight, but I swear he knew. Like he heard what I said and understood it in his bones. Eli didn't argue anymore. He just nodded once. And we followed, deeper into whatever was waiting. But in that moment, I think we both knew. This wasn't just about saving something wild. This was about finding the part of ourselves that never got saved. And finally, doing something about it. We followed him into the woods. No trail, no moonlight, just the soft crunch of wet needles beneath our boots and the occasional snap of a branch that made me flinch every time. The trees grew tighter the deeper we went, their limbs arching overhead like arms closing in. And the silence, it wasn't empty. It was thick, heavy, like we were walking into something sacred or forgotten or both. Sprig moved ahead of us, quick but careful, his little body weaving through the undergrowth like he'd done it 1,000 times. He'd glance back every so often, not to check if we were keeping up, but to make sure we were still coming. There was a purpose in his steps, but also something I couldn't name. Urgency, maybe fear. Eli kept close behind me, flashlight off, his hand brushing my back now and then like he was checking if I was still real. He hadn't said much since we left the road. I could feel him holding back every second, his need to turn around, to drag me back to the truck. But something in him knew, just like I did. We weren't supposed to stop, not yet. And still, that silence. It wasn't just the absence of birds or bugs or wind. It was deeper than that. Like the whole forest had paused, like it was holding its breath. I felt my pulse in my ears, in my fingertips. Every sound we made felt too loud, every breath too risky. Somewhere along the way, I lost track of time. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. All I remember is the way my thoughts started slipping backward. Things I hadn't let myself think about in years started surfacing. My dad's voice, the weight of the old green backpack I carried when I was 7, the taste of copper in my mouth when I bit my tongue trying not to cry. And the woods. Always the woods. I was 9 the first time he left me in a forest. He said it was to teach me not to wander. He said I needed to learn to sit with the dark. He was drunk, of course. I didn't understand that part then. All I knew was that the trail had disappeared. The sun had dipped below the trees, and he never came back when he said he would. I remember curling up beside a moss-covered stump. My fingers numb from the cold. I remember whispering to myself so I wouldn't feel alone, telling myself stories in my head. And I remember the sound of something moving in the brush, just out of sight. I told myself it was a deer, but I never looked. It was the longest night of my life, and standing there now, years later, with Sprig humming softly ahead and Eli breathing behind me like a warning, it all rushed back like it never left. I stopped walking. My knees hit the ground, not from pain, just from weight. Memory has mass, and mine was dragging me under. I didn't cry, not right away, just sat there breathing shallow, eyes locked on the ground. Pine needles, dirt, a single pale mushroom curling up from the roots. I could smell the damp in the earth, the old rot of fallen logs. My throat tightened. Eli knelt beside me. His voice was soft for once. "Hey, Claire, what is it? I didn't look at him." I didn't have to. I felt him there, steady, confused, waiting. "I know why I couldn't let him go," I said. My voice felt like it came from someone else's mouth. "I know now." Eli didn't interrupt, because I know what it's like to wait for someone who doesn't come back. My hands clenched in the dirt. I let the weight of it settle. The truth, the fear, the echo of every night I spent pretending that part of me wasn't still stuck in those woods, sitting beside a tree, wondering if love ever meant safety. Sprigg had stopped a few yards ahead, watching us, quiet, still, like he understood. Quiet, still, like he understood. Like he was waiting, not just physically, but for this. For me to catch up to myself. I met his gaze. And in that small, strange face, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. A longing. Not the kind you're given. The kind you find in the wildest places where no one thinks to look. I stood, brushing dirt off my jeans. Eli helped me up without a word. We kept walking. Sprigg made that humming sound again, softer now, like a lullaby from a dream I barely remembered. And then, an answer. Low, distant. From the trees behind us, we froze. It came again. From our right this time. The same tone, same length, but not from Sprigg. He stiffened. His body went rigid, ears twitching, eyes narrowing. Then he looked back at me, not in fear, in warning. He hummed again. Nothing answered. We moved faster after that. Sprigg no longer checked behind him. He just went. Like whatever was out there, whoever was close. And not meant for us. The branches thinned slightly, enough for moonlight to push through in broken slashes. I caught glimpses of Eli's face in the pale light. Tense, jaw tight, eyes locked ahead. He wasn't scared the way I was. His fear wore armor. Mine didn't. But still, we kept going. The forest started to open in places. Little clearings, almost circular, as if something had passed through and flattened the earth. And the further we went, the quieter everything else became. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Sprigg stopped again. This time, he didn't hum. He looked up, sniffed the air. Then he turned to us. There was something new in his eyes, a kind of grief. I didn't know what we were about to find, but I knew, deep down, we were closer than ever. To what, I wasn't sure. But I felt it in my chest, like the echo of a name I hadn't heard in years, still unfinished, still waiting. The trees opened suddenly, like breath held too long, finally letting go. There was no trail, no signs. Just a hollow in the forest, soft with moss and shadow. Sprigg stopped at the edge and didn't move. His chest rose and fell like he was trying not to sob. And for a second, I thought he might turn around. But he didn't. He took one step into the clearing, and the world changed. She was there, lying on her side, one massive leg twisted unnaturally, caught in the jaws of a rusted steel trap the size of a truck tire. Her body was enormous, shaped like him, but taller than any man I've ever met. Her fur was darker, thick and coarse, matted with mud and blood. Her arms were longer than they should have been, fingers like cords of muscle tapering to thick nails caked in dirt. And her face, God, her face wasn't a monster's. It was a mother's, even in pain, even half-conscious. There was something unmistakable in the way she curled slightly around the wound. Like she tried to shield it, tried to protect herself, maybe even protect him. Sprigg ran to her without hesitation. Not a sound from him now, just the frantic pitter of his feet across the earth, and then a soft thud as he fell beside her. Clutching her fur, he pressed his face to her leg, then her chest, then whimpered, low and broken, not like a cry. Not like a cry, like a plea. The matron, because that's what I called her from that moment on, stirred. Barely. One eye opened, sluggish and rimmed red, but still sharp. Still watching. She didn't growl. This long, shuddering breath that sounded like wind slipping through dead leaves. Her gaze locked onto Eli and me, and I swear my heart stopped right there. Every part of me expected fury, a roar, a lunge. But none of that came. She just watched. Still, tense. Her body curled the slightest bit closer to Sprig, protective even now. Eli grabbed my wrist. Tight. Claire. We should go. We have to go. No. I whispered. She's huge. She's bleeding. That trap looks like it could crush bone. We don't know what she'll do. You don't know what Hay will do. She didn't attack, I said, louder this time. She didn't even move. That's not a reason to get closer. I looked at her again. Her side heaved with each breath. Slow, labored. The ground beneath her soaked dark with blood that had begun to turn the roots red. She was dying. And still, she wasn't fighting, just breathing. Sprig looked up at me, just once, and in that single look, I felt it clear as day. It please. I moved before Eli could stop me. Stepping out into the clearing, slow and careful, arms down, nothing in my hands. Every part of me screamed to run, but something else. Something stronger told me not to. I kept my eyes down, like I'd read in a book once about mountain lions. No direct stare, no sudden moves, just stillness. The air around her felt different, thicker, charged, like it was holding something sacred. When I got close enough, I saw the wound fully. The trap's teeth had sunk clean through flesh, breaking skin and maybe even bone. Rust clung to the edges, mixed with blood and tufts of fur. One of her toes, if that's what they were, twitched. Sprig whimpered again, curling tighter. I dropped to my knees, and then, without thinking, I took my hair tie off my wrist. Just a simple black band. I pulled my backpack forward and dug out the thinnest cord I had, a gear strap for camping, meant for tents or sleeping bags. I wrapped it between my hands and looked at the trap. Eli came up behind me then. I didn't hear him walk, but I felt him kneel. His voice was low. You're not going to be able to open that thing on your own. I nodded. He sighed. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out the metal bar from the jack kit in the truck, and handed it to me. We worked in silence, pressing, wedging, straining. The metal creaked, shrieked, groaned. My palms burned. Eli grunted, his arms shaking as he pressed down. Sprig backed up a little, eyes wide but unmoving. The matron didn't react. Not once. She kept her eyes closed, body still. And then, with a snap that echoed through the trees, the trap gave way. The jaws opened half an inch. Enough. Eli shoved a stick into the gap and levered it wider. I reached in, heart hammering, and gently pulled her leg free. She didn't scream. She didn't jerk. Just breathed. One long exhale, like she'd been holding it for hours. Blood poured. But slower now. Like the pressure had been building and was finally released. I took my bandane, damp with forest and fear, and pressed it gently to the worst of the cut. It soaked through almost instantly. Sprig crawled forward again and lay his head on her arm. His little hand gripped her fingers, tight. Then she moved. One arm lifted slowly, like the weight of the world was dragging from her shoulder, and reached out, not toward Sprig, toward me. I didn't pull back. Her fingers brushed the side of my head. Soft, deliberate, not a threat. Then she lowered it again, resting it across her chest. For a long time, no one spoke. Not Eli, not me, not the woods. It was like even the forest knew this moment didn't belong to words. Only breath, only stillness, only understanding. I sat back on my heels, hands shaking, covered in blood that wasn't mine. Eli stared, wide-eyed, whispering. No one's gonna believe this. I looked at the matron, at the slow rise and fall of her chest, the peace settling over her face like mist. I don't care if they believe it, I said. I believe it. That's enough. And in the back of my mind, beneath the fear and awe and wild ache in my chest, I realized something that stuck with me long after the forest swallowed us again. She wasn't a monster. She was a mother. And tonight, she let us in. I didn't know how long we sat there, kneeling beside her. The world outside that clearing had fallen away. No more road, no more plan, no more pretending like this was just some weird detour we'd laugh about later. This was happening, and she was bleeding out in front of us. The matron's breathing was slowing, steady but strained, every inhale dragging like someone pulling something too heavy uphill. Her eyes were closed now, not unconscious, just reserving what little energy she had left. And Sprig, he hadn't moved an inch since we pulled her from the trap. He just kept one hand wrapped around her arm like he was anchoring her to this world. His chest rose fast, his shoulders trembling with every breath. I think if she let go, he would too. Eli stood behind me, shifting from foot to foot, arms crossed, the cold biting through his jacket. I didn't have to look up to know what he was thinking. He didn't say it out loud yet, but it was building in his throat. That fear, that doubt, we can't stay here all night, he finally said. She's stable now. Whatever that means for her species. But if someone hears us, no one's out here, I said quietly. You don't know that. I kept my eyes on her leg. The bandana I used was soaked and slipping, useless now. The wound had stopped pulsing blood, but there was still seepage. I pressed it back into place anyway. Like it mattered. Like it was the only thing I could do. Sprig let out this low, vibrating sound. Almost like a hum. But it wasn't calm. It was raw. Like he was calling out through his bones. I didn't know what it meant, but I felt it in my teeth. Then I felt something else. The weight of Eli's hand on my shoulder. I looked up. He didn't say anything for a second, just stared at her. Then at Sprig, then at me. If you're gonna do this, he said, I'm not letting you do it alone. He pulled the jack bar back out from where he'd set it down, rolled his sleeves, and knelt beside me. You sure? I asked. No. But I'm here. We didn't talk after that. There was no time for that kind of comfort. We just worked. Found a thicker branch to wedge the trap further open. Got a flatter rock for leverage. I'd never seen Eli like this. Silent, focused, almost mechanical. Like if he stopped moving, he'd have to feel what this was. We tried to lift her leg higher to bind it better, but she groaned. Low and rough, like thunder in a cave. Sprig immediately climbed onto her chest, his little hands pushing at her fur like he could soothe the pain away. He let out another sound, but this time, it rose, fuller, higher pitched. A long, trembling call that sent a chill down my spine. It didn't feel like a noise. It felt like a prayer. And as it drifted out into the woods, something in the trees responded. Not a voice, not an echo. Just stillness. Everything paused. The wind stopped, the branches still, and the quiet listened. We managed to wrap her leg again. Improvised a splint from a curved limb and the cord I'd used earlier. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good. But it held. And when I finally sat back, hands shaking, face damp with sweat and dirt, she opened her eyes again. Not wide. Just enough to see us. Then she did something that split me open in a way I didn't expect. She reached out, slowly, not to push, not to claw. She touched Eli, just lightly, the tips of her fingers grazing the side of his face, like she was reading him, like she knew what it cost him to be here. He didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared back at her, his breath caught halfway between shock and reverence. Then she turned that same hand, barely lifted it higher, and touched me too. I closed my eyes. There was no sound, no words. Just that moment. And then she did something I'll never forget. Something I couldn't explain then, and still can't now. She bowed her head. Not much, just an inch or two. But it was enough. A gesture. A choice. Like she saw us not as intruders, but as help. I felt something break in me when she did that. Some dam I didn't even know I was holding back, because it meant she understood. She knew we would come back for him, that we didn't run, that we tried, and that maybe, just maybe, there was still something left in this world worth trusting. Sprig curled up next to her again, tucking into her side like a kid who hadn't known sleep in days. His breathing slowed, finally matching hers. Eli sat down in the dirt beside me, his hands on his knees, staring at nothing. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. Because there are moments where language has nothing to offer, where every word is a weight you don't want to drop into something that's still. We stayed like that, long enough for the cold to sink into our bones. Long enough to forget what we were supposed to be afraid of. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if she would make it through the night. But I knew she wasn't alone anymore, and neither were we. When we finally stood to stretch, I looked down at her again. This massive creature. This myth brought into flesh. This mother who had nearly died trying to protect her child. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not fear, not pity, but awe. Pure, quiet awe. Eli whispered it before I could. No one's ever going to believe this. And I whispered back, without even thinking. They don't have to. Because some things don't need to be believed. They just need to be felt. We didn't speak as we walked. Not a word between us, not even a whisper. Something about the air made sound feel like a sin. The forest wasn't quiet. It was holding quiet, like silence wasn't the absence of noise, but a presence all its own. Something that watched. Something that waited. And whatever it was, we were inside it now. The matron moved slow, each step stiff and strained. Her weight leaning into Sprig now and then when the pain got too much. He kept close to her side, one arm up to touch her back, as if the contact could guide her. Eli and I followed a few paces behind, not from fear, but out of respect. That's what it felt like, even though I didn't have a word for it back then. Reverence. Like walking behind something sacred. Every so often she would stop, lift her head, and breathe in. Long, deep, through her nose. Like she was searching for something buried in the air. Then she'd exhale, slow and heavy, and take the next step. The wound still wept through the wrap we'd made, but she didn't cry out. Didn't stagger. She just kept going. The trees made space for her, like the forest bent itself ever so slightly to clear a path no one else could see. Branches arched upward. Roots veered left and right like ripples in water. The dirt felt firmer beneath our feet, more certain somehow. Like this was a trail that remembered being walked once long ago and was finally being walked again. Then came the clearing. Not large, just enough for the moonlight to press through, cold and silver, casting shadows that move like they were breathing. The air here smelled different, cleaner, older, pine and stone and something faintly sweet, like rain on old bark. She paused there, just at the edge. One more breath, one more moment. Then she turned to us, Not both of us. Just me. Her eyes met mine and held. And then she lifted her hand. 3 fingers raised, the other 2 folded in. The motion slow, deliberate, her palm toward me. It wasn't random. It wasn't instinct. I knew that symbol. I'd seen it once before, in a book I barely remembered from college. A gesture used by some of the old tribal nations, a signal of peace, of truce, the way a warrior might greet another in neutral ground. A promise. I come with no threat. She held it there for a second, then let her hand fall, and I felt it in my chest. Not fear, not relief, forgiveness. That word came to me, clear as thunder. I didn't even know what exactly I was being forgiven for, but my eyes blurred with tears I hadn't meant to let fall. It was like I'd been walking around carrying guilt I couldn't name. And she, this creature from some other world, some other language, had seen it and let it go. Eli must felt it too. I heard his breath catch behind me. The matron turned again, nudging Sprig gently, and continued on. Sprig looked back at me for a heartbeat, then hurried to catch up with her. We watched them walk deeper into the woods, their silhouettes painted in moonlight and mist, one large and limping, one small and steady. Step by step, the night began to close behind them. Branches moved again. Shadows softened. And then they were gone. Not vanished. Not vanished. Not vanished exactly. Just out of reach. I didn't move. Neither did Eli. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket. My hands were shaking, not from cold. Something deeper, like I'd been rewired, rewritten. She showed you something, Eli said after a long time. Yeah, I breathed. She did. We stood there until the cold crept in under our collars and the silence around us shifted. Not into noise, into space, like it had given us time, and that time had run out. We started walking. The way back didn't feel like the way in. The trees were different somehow, the trail wider, easier. Even the dark didn't feel as thick. The wind returned, gentle and clean, brushing through the pine needles like it was carrying secrets. I looked up at the stars once we broke the tree line, blinking at their sudden brightness. The sky felt enormous, too big to understand. But my chest felt lighter. I couldn't explain it. I still can't, but something had been lifted off of me in that clearing. Not like a burden removed. More like a door opened that had been stuck shut for years. When we reached the edge of the woods and saw the shape of the truck waiting in the dark, Eli stopped and looked at me. You think they'll be okay? He asked. I don't know, I said, but I think she wanted us to know they'd be free. He nodded, and we kept walking. But even as we stepped out of the forest, some part of me stayed behind. A piece of myself that had finally been seen, understood, and returned to the wild. And I think maybe that's what she gave us in the end. Not just her trust, not just her peace, but the permission to forgive ourselves and to walk forward a little less afraid. We didn't say a word the whole way back, just the hum of the truck and the rhythm of gravel under the tires, a steady heartbeat beneath the silence. Eli kept both hands on the wheel like he was afraid if he loosened his grip, he'd fall apart. I sat in the passenger seat with my arms tucked around myself, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Something hollow and raw and quiet. The smell of forest still clung into my jacket, pine sap and damp earth, and something older, like stone that had seen too much. My jeans were stiff with dried mud. My palms were stained dark from blood, hers and mine. I hadn't realized I'd scraped them back in the clearing, wrestling the trap open. I didn't care. The lights on the dash flickered for a second, then steadied. Eli tapped the gas gauge, still low. The town was about 15 miles out. We'd make it. Barely. The headlights caught the fog just ahead of the ridge. Thin, curling mist that drifted across the road in ghost-like sheets. We slowed as we crested the hill, and something in my chest pulled tight. That ridge had always been the point of return. The place where the wilderness let go of you and gave you back to the world. But this time, it didn't feel like a return. It felt like a departure. We passed the tree line and the forest dropped away behind us. Just fields now, scattered brush, open sky. The kind of space that should have felt like freedom but didn't. Not tonight. I looked down at my hands again, at the dried blood beneath my fingernails, the faint smell of iron on my sleeves. And then, tucked in my lap, the thing I hadn't let go of since we left the woods, the bandana. It was barely cloth anymore, just a crumpled scrap, soaked and dried and soaked again. But it still held the shape of the moment. The memory, the act. Sprigg had taken it from me, then given it back. That mattered. That meant something. I pressed it to my chest, just for a second, then folded it slowly, carefully, like it was glass. Eli glanced sideways but didn't speak. We hit the long stretch before town, the one with the old service station that hadn't worked since before I was born. Just a crumbling sign and a gutted shell. We passed it like we always did, but this time I watched it vanish in the side mirror, the shape of it warping in the glass until it looked like it was waving goodbye. I keep waiting to feel normal again, I said quiet. Eli didn't answer right away. Just let the thought sit between us like something sacred. Then, almost under his breath, "Maybe we're not supposed to." I nodded, not because I agreed, because I knew he was right. The road curved and dipped and we followed it without question, like a line drawn before we ever chose to walk it. And somewhere near the bottom of the hill, just before the valley opened up, I pulled out my phone. It still had battery. 2 bars. I hadn't touched it all night. I opened the camera roll. 1 photo. I didn't even remember taking it. Probably by accident in the woods. My thumb must have hit the button while we were moving. I tapped it open. It was a blur of trees, streaked with motion, dark greens and browns melting into each other like watercolor. At first, it looked like nothing, but then I saw it. The ground, near the bottom left. A footprint, huge, not deep but clear enough. 5 toes. The ball of the foot pressed into moss and dirt. Not boot-shaped, not human. No sign of Sprigg, no sign of the matron. Just that. I turned the screen toward Eli. He gave it a glance, then smiled. Not wide, just enough. "They didn't want proof," he said. "They gave us something better." We drove on. The horizon began to shift. The sky bleeding toward gray. The stars fading behind morning haze. Somewhere, birds had started to stir. The world was waking up. But it wasn't the same one we left. I slid the phone back into my jacket and tucked the folded bandana into the inner pocket. Not to hide it. To keep it close. It didn't belong to anyone else. Eli turned off the main road and followed the back route into town. Familiar fences. Gas station lights. The old motel sign blinking like always. It was like nothing had changed. But I had. He parked in front of the diner. We didn't go in, just sat there for a minute, watching the neon flicker on the windshield. And I remember thinking in that moment that this world wasn't meant to carry everything we'd seen. But I could carry it. Even if it was just in my hands, even if no one ever knew. Years passed like rivers run. Slow in some seasons, fast in others, but always carving something into you. I never went back to that forest. Not really. Not the same way. But part of it stayed under my skin. Tucked somewhere I didn't speak of unless the light hit just right or the night got too quiet. People like to think experiences fade, that the wild gets left behind when you trade your boots for a mailbox and a mortgage. But some things don't fade. They sink in. I live in a town now. Small. Oregon Coast Range. Pines as far as the eye can see. Fog that rolls in like a memory. Fog that rolls in like a... It's quiet here. The kind of quiet you earn. I opened a studio right on Main, just a few blocks from the old train tracks. Nothing big, nothing fancy. A room with light, wood floors, and a kettle that whistles at the wrong pitch. I paint, not for galleries, not for money, just because I have to. My biggest piece hangs on the back wall, framed in dark wood taller than I am. I started it the winter after everything. I didn't plan to. It just showed up one night when I couldn't sleep, and the sky wouldn't stop humming. The canvas pulled me like a tether, like it already knew what it needed to become. It's a forest, of course. Always is. Tall pines, thick air, orange light streaming in like fire through the canopy. The center of the painting is a figure, covered in fur, massive, but gentle in posture. One arm bent low, and in that arm, a child. Small, curled into the warmth of her chest. You don't see their faces. That's important. I never paint their faces. Faces belong to stories that beg to be proven. This story doesn't. I paint them in light, because that's what they were. Not monster, not legends. Just a moment where something broke open in the world and let the truth out. When people ask what it means, I usually just smile and offer tea. Some get it. Some don't. Some stare a little too long and shift in their chair like the air around them got heavier. I never explain. That's not my job, but I keep the studio open late sometimes, on evenings when the wind rises through the trees and the lights flicker, and you can feel something brushing the edge of the world. I work best then, when the line is thinnest. Tonight's one of those nights. The kettle clicks off, and I step to the window. There's a breeze moving the branches in slow rhythm. And underneath it, faint, but there, a sound. Not a cry, not an animal. Something else. A low, almost musical hum, like a lullaby carried on the wind. I hold my breath without meaning to. I don't look for the source. I never do. It's not about seeing anymore. It's about seeing anymore. It's about again knowing. I walk to the window seat, sit down, unbutton the inside pocket of my jacket and pull out the old cloth. The one from that night. Still folded, still frayed. The stain has faded, but the memory hasn't. I set it gently on the wooden sill. The last light of evening slides through the glass and catches the fabric just right. And there it is. A shape. Faint, only visible in the right angle, under the softest sun. 3 long fingers, pressed into the weave like a ghost that never left. I don't move. I don't speak. Because that's not what this moment needs. It just needs to be witnessed. And I hope that out there, somewhere beneath the trees, she knows I understood. That I heard what she didn't say. That I carried it with me. That I never turned it into a story for fame or evidence or likes. Just a life lived a little differently. I let the wind pass. Let it curl through the room. Then I fold the cloth back into its worn corners and tuck it into the sill. Leave it there, like an offering, like a promise. Some creatures vanish, others leave a mark, and some just come close enough for you to remember how it felt to be seen. Sometimes, life doesn't offer closure in the way we expect. It doesn't tie things up neatly or hand us answers carved in stone. It gives us moments, raw, quiet, haunting. Moments that brush up against something ancient inside us, and then disappear before we can name them. But if we listen closely, if we slow down enough to truly feel what the world is trying to show us, those moments stay. They don't fade like old photographs. They echo. They hum. They change the way we walk, the way we see others, the way we hold space for silence. This wasn't a story about monsters or myths. It wasn't about fear or danger. It was about the spaces in between, where fear meets empathy, where judgment softens into understanding, and where the unknown stops being a threat and becomes a mirror. Because the truth is, the most powerful encounters in life aren't always the loudest ones. They're often the quiet choices. The ones made in the dark, with no reward. The ones that ask nothing but offer everything. And sometimes, those choices don't make sense to the world. But they make us who we are. There's something deeply human about helping when no one's watching. About choosing compassion without needing to be understood. About seeing the fragile, sacred bond that connects all living things, and reaching out anyway, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because in a world that often asks us to close off, to move on, to doubt what our hearts know to be true, choosing to care is an act of quiet defiance. It's how we honor not just others, but ourselves. Maybe that's the lesson buried in all of this. Not in the facts, not in the questions, but in the feeling that lingers afterward. That feeling that reminds us, not everything needs to be proven. Some things only need to be witnessed, with eyes open, with hearts open, and with the courage to carry them forward into whatever comes next. If something in this story spoke to you, if it stirred something quiet, or pulled a memory from the edges of your chest, I hope you'll take a moment to share it. I'd love to hear how it made you feel, what it made you remember, or maybe just what it left behind in you. And if you haven't yet, I'd be truly grateful if you'd consider subscribing and joining us here, where our stories like this can breathe, grow, and connect us in ways we often forget we need. Thank you for walking this path with me. I'll see you in the next story.